just connecting to our own erotic self in a healthy way, just to validate it and to give it some space and to listen to ourselves to see what would I like out of this part of my life.
You're listening to Find the Good News, episode 104, The Healthy Triggers, a Beacon Series conversation featuring Laura Zam, sexuality educator, certified trauma professional, and author of The Pleasure Plan, One Woman's Search for Sexual Healing. Find the Good News is produced by Parker Brand Creative Services, a branding agency that thinks sideways, pushes forward, and gets your brand up. See what else we do at parkerbrandup.com. When I read Laura Zam's book, The Pleasure Plan, I could clearly see how her work with trauma and its effects on human sexuality would be of great value to me personally. In her book, Laura opens up about her own traumatic experiences, sharing very candid details that created serious intimacy issues, not only with her and her partners, but with herself. If you listen to this show often, you know that I advocate exploring our inner workings, going precisely to the pain to apply healing light. Laura, it seems, approves the same course of action. By taking this path herself, she has turned what she discovered into a source of wellness, pleasure, and sexual healing for others. I was surprised to learn that The Pleasure Plan was her first book in our conversation. She has a natural storytelling ability, a gift of drawing the reader into each situation, painting fine lines and fleshing out details, adding volume to the spaces and circumstances she shares. Laura cuts right through the noise by saying what needs to be said, even if the subject seemed taboo, and her comfort in sharing discomfort put me at ease. In this episode, I opened up and talked about things I've never spoken of before. I believe that is because Laura created a space of listening, love, and genuine care. She understands that for people to speak freely about traumatic experiences, particularly sexual trauma, they need to know they are safe and witnessed with eyes of non-judgment. Human beings are sexual creatures, and sex should be a source of joy and pleasure, not a fearful reminder of sorrow, shame, or pain. Thankfully, there are people in this world like Laura Zam that understand this, and more, they put themselves on personal missions to help others. Now, it's time to get comfortable. I mean really, really comfortable. Open yourself to the idea that there might be something just for you in this conversation. Then tune your attention to this Good News Beacon and press play on a little good news.
Wake up this morning, dreaming up a story. I can hear the way it's going, 'cause you're laughing in your sleep. On the path to your deliverance and a holy wall of light pouring through your window.
Old news, bad news, fake news. Sometimes you want to shut those signals down and seek a better source. With my Find the Good News Beacon series, I tune into good people doing good works wherever I can find them. I scan across the full spectrum of life, seeking out human beings that have turned their dials towards helping others, aligning their time, resources, and talents with goodness, justice, mercy, and love. In each episode, I sync up with the hearts and minds of my extraordinary guests. We have dynamic conversations that invigorate the mind long after our transmission has ended. I discover the critical life experiences that shape them, the perspectives that drive them, and the fundamental beliefs that have anchored them to a path of goodness. There's a lot of background noise in the world. My name is Oran Parker, and I'm cutting through the static to find the good.
And I love you just as well.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I've been reading your book, and then I've been going through all of your videos and your story. Honestly, I connect with it on so many levels. I don't even really know where to begin. I told my wife last night, I said, I'm really looking forward to this, though. I said, because there's so many things, little parallels that I drew from your story. I'm sure you have that happen with a lot of people as you've told your story to people, and through your book especially.
Yeah, I think people identify with it. It's kind of, different people take different things, and and it's fantastic for me to see particularly groups of people that might, particularly connect with it, like women of a certain age or people who've experienced, some sort of issues, have a history, some kind of a history with regard to, all kinds of dysfunction, abuse,
Yeah.
which is, I think most of us, have something that we're something challenging in our past that we're healing perpetually. And I really, really, really appreciate the work that you're doing, Oran, because, it's just so stressful to look at the news, to keep track of everything that's going on. And I hear people say all the time, why can't the media focus on the good things that are happening? Why can't we be uplifted when we engage with media? So this is just, and I'm also a seeker, so I really do also connect with that part of your journey and your guests.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. You're right. I would think about that after I have a conversation. I mean, usually each one of these talks, and I mean, there's so many podcasts, as you know, and there's so many media channels that people are producing out there.
Yeah.
But I don't mean this without the true gravity that is attached to it when I say that each one of these conversations I've had has stuck with me. I mean, they've actually changed my life. Now, whether they've changed my life in a dramatic way or just changed it in the sense that I've explored myself in new ways, or looked at the world a little differently, or just sometimes the truth of the matter is something will happen and I'll go, oh, this reminds me of a conversation I had with someone else, and I'm able to lean on their experience or their story or what they've been through or just something they shared. And I find that just that generalized human wisdom, it does exist.
Yeah.
And there's so many wise people out there. And it is easy to forget that when we're saturated by just wave upon wave of tailored negative news.
Yeah,
it does
exactly. Crisis, just so crisis oriented. And there might be one big news event, but then it's got to fill hours and hours of programming. So they just, spin it this way and spin it. And it's like, it's not that big of a story.
Right. Oh, I know. And it just keeps going on and on. See, that's why I think that's probably why I love talking to people like you, and particularly what I think I'm going to enjoy about this conversation, because this is sort of the mystery spot where I think awakening and healing actually happens in a story like yours. And the way it's alchemy, a lot of people are using that term again.
I love that. Yeah, and then I identify with that a lot.
You're definitely doing that. I mean, there's pain in there. I mean, no doubt. And real pain, not just, and I don't want to belittle anybody's pain. I mean, if you're feeling pain, it's real pain, no matter where it's coming from, whether it's self-inflicted internally or externally by forces you can't control. But, you have a healthy dose of all of those things that happened in your life. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, but look at what you're doing. I mean, you walk right into it. And you turn it into help for others. I mean, I don't know that there's anything more holy than that. I just can't think of anything, is to take your personal pain and heal yourself, but also heal others through that. That's just something to me that it's just gold,
Awesome. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. And you're a good soul. So I take that to heart.
Well, so people understand
service.
I want people to I've kind of jumped right in, and I usually do that on this show. I just get going, and I don't want people to not understand the context about and what we're talking about. So if you don't mind, just for a minute here, if you could give a little introduction of yourself to my listeners, and we can go from there.
Sure. I'm Laura Zam. I'm a sexuality educator, relationship coach, certified trauma professional, and yoga teacher. And I am an author. I'm the author of a book called The Pleasure Plan, which came out this past May. And The Pleasure Plan is a story about my journey healing from sexual violation and 6 different kinds of sex problems to heal myself right after getting married for the first time at 46. I went on a journey seeing 15 different kinds of practitioners and trying 30 different healing modalities. And I was able to cure myself this way and also discover all kinds of good things, all kinds of good things in the world and all kinds of remedies for lots of different sexual issues associated with trauma and associated with basically any kind of issue. And so I feel really blessed to have been able to do that.
Yeah, that's so, I got so much out of your book, and I'm hoping that you can, well, I know you will. It's interesting because I'm not a victim, right, of any kind of sexual trauma. But when I was reading your book, it got me really thinking about just trauma in general. Mm-hmm. And I know you work with people in different categories of trauma, correct?
Yeah, I do.
But what I thought was really interesting is how, and I think about this all the time. I mean, I've always had, as far back as I can remember, a very odd relationship with sex. Mm. And even to this day, it still exists. But in reading your book, I started putting some pieces together, and looking at all these little breadcrumbs. And I was like, man, it's interesting because the traumas that I was connected to, they weren't mine, but they were people that were close to me that I cared about. And because I guess, you told a story in your book about your brother. Mm-hmm. That really hit me really hard, where you told your brother about your neighbor, right, and the assault, and he was a grandfather, correct, to one of your friends. Am I telling that properly?
Yeah, exactly, to a girl on the block that I was friendly with. Mm-hmm.
So when I was reading that part of your story, I was like, it brought me back to something that I think about all the time. And how things can get rewired for a child at a young age. Right. And it was a story very similar where someone it's not my story to tell, so I'm going to tell it as vaguely as possible, okay. But I am in the story. But someone close to me, almost like, it was almost such a parallel to what you told, where I had a sort of good relationship with an elderly person. And then I found out that someone close to me did not have a good relationship and they were afraid of that person. And when I was almost offended when they said something like, I don't like that person. I don't like them. And that bothered me. Like, I was like, how could you not like them? And then they told me about what was happening. And of course, we were very, very, very young. Little. Right. I mean, young children, like 4 and 8. And all of a sudden, I felt the gravity of that person's pain, like, on me. It was like my pain, then my duty to try to make things right. So I felt like it was important that it be told. And it wasn't my place to tell, but I felt like I was trying to protect this person and telling on this adult for what they were doing. But when I was reading your book, it was like the way you described the way that made you feel for it to be told to an adult. I was like, God, I don't know. Did I do the wrong thing? Because what ended up happening was there was no justice. There was no repercussions to the adult. The adult, it was shoved because of embarrassment to a larger network of people. It was sort of decided that it would all be kept hush hush. And all the adults would sort of run interference to protect the children, but there was never any real justice. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I think about how that rewired me and the victim.
Wow.
Because it taught us that there is no justice. That was what we learned, that adults don't do the right thing. You can't trust them. Authority, people in authority over you will not make the right decision, and they won't protect you. Mm-hmm. They would rather save face. And so it created, and it was all around sexuality. Like in my mind, even, and I think about that as how I see how it affected the other person. But for me as a man who it wasn't me it happened to, but I can see the seeds of that in all of my different sexual relationships that I've had. And it's almost like a fear. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was like a fear of hurting someone. Like I always felt like, because I was a man, that to want or enjoy sex just freely and fully, that I was some kind of perpetrator. Like I was victimizing someone. Even though I never did. It was never like that, but I felt, if I'm being honest, full disclosure, I can see that. I go, wow, I do have that. It got entangled in the sexual part of my life.
Yeah.
Your book really pulled that out for me.
Wow. That's something that I hear a lot. I talk to a lot of guys after reading my book or just knowing about my work.
Yeah.
And what I'm writing about. I haven't quite heard that, but it makes total sense. It makes incredible sense. And I really think that I think it's very common. I think there's a lot of layers for men that we're not talking about at all. There's the men who were abused as boys de facto.
Sure.
That's still very, very, very difficult to uncover, for them to come out. And there's so much shame around that. But I think that there are all these nuances that you're talking about and these layers of complexity. What I hear a lot is men who tell me that they were involved with someone who was abused and that they tried to be the good guy to heal them, basically, and to repair the damage, and that they felt that they were not able to do that this person never really trusted them, and they carry that wound tremendously, that they were not able to save this person, but also to be that good person. And I think it's connected to what you're saying, this feeling of responsibility and somehow feeling indicted. And I don't want to say this in a controversial way, because I think it's just a big conversation that needs to happen. But in many ways, the way that we're teaching prevention exacerbates that a little bit. And this is not to take away from any kinds of consent education or affirmative consent or bystander education. I think that that's necessary. I think it's fantastic the way that it's often taught. But I do think we need an augment to recognize this part of it, that men often they do feel implicated. And what do we do with those feelings, and how do we harness that? Because I think that men want to be healers. I really, really think that this is ingrained, and that this is can be part of a very healthy masculinity.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like we're really harnessing it yet. Instead, we're saying you're a guy, and therefore you've got these tendencies, or you go ahead and you fix men. You fix that toxic masculinity and come back to me. And I think there's a real missed opportunity there.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I have similar thoughts and things that I've thought about like that as well. I mean, it's interesting because, how one conversation leads to the next, but I guess I came right out of a conversation yesterday about feminine energy, and it got me thinking along those lines about what kind of energies do I have in myself. And I do think there are men who have feminine energies in them that are more prominent, and they are more nurturing and perhaps more healing. And calling them feminine doesn't necessarily mean to say that they are female, you know. And I think that's a good thing. You're right. It's like it's okay for men to have those characteristics and want to be healers, but right now there's almost like this polarized backlash. So, for instance, as I was reading your book, I was trying to almost go through what would it take for me to be completely whole, you know, and healed, to get over this idea of, and it's not like it's a front-facing idea. It's almost like an undercurrent that I'm hurting. Somehow I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
When I desire and allow myself to desire sex, even with my wife. I mean, it's crazy, but it's like this. It's like I just was like, man, it's like even that, like because I love her. This is the equation. Right. If this makes any sense, because I love her, I don't want to abuse her, like as if just having normal, healthy sex is some kind of abuse. And I think that got planted. I really do. I think there's something in there. Yeah. I don't know how to root it out. I mean, awareness is one part, but it's there. I can see it clearly. And I hadn't really ever thought of that. I was just like, man, this is something that's old, of course, you know, from long ago.
But I think there is a remedy in that, because I said it's not a conversation I have often, but it is a conversation. I'm thinking as we're talking, it is a conversation in some ways I have had with people I've been involved with, including my husband. And so I think that there is a remedy in there, and the remedy is a kind, in relationship particularly, it is a kind of, it's a context of mutual healing, and it's and that healing is also about empowerment. And it's empowering both parties to be very open, really communicative about what their needs and their desires are, you know, so that it's to free it without guilt, without shame, without fear that it's going to hurt another person. Yeah. And I think that, and then also creating this space for both people, or multiple, you know, if that's a relationship configuration, but for people to say, oh, you know what, this doesn't work for me, this is triggering, or this is too much, or this is not something I want, or this we need to compromise on this because, you know, this doesn't quite work for me. I think that it really boils down to that communication, and to see the evolution of the relationship in this department as healing. To me is then maybe a useful word, because then it's about going forward, but maybe also it's about bringing in things from the past that might need some kinds of rewiring. Yeah. I know I've definitely done that with my husband, and it is something that's not explicitly in the book, but maybe it is implicit in the book, that the more vocal I got about what was going on for me and what I wanted and how I wanted things to unfold, the more I freed my husband to say, wait a minute, I need healing too, but also so that he didn't feel that he was attacking me, right? Because now I'm just openly saying, okay, yeah, this is what I want, and hey, no, not so much that. You know, just as in a concrete example, you know, I'm tired at night. I'm the type of person, 7 p.m. is sort of it's the demarcation for me. Before 7 p.m., I'm like really can do anything. After 7, I'm just gonna want to veg out on the couch and then go to sleep. So, you know, so the traditional, okay, let's get romantic, you know, right before bedtime just doesn't work for me, because I'm tired. So I had to reconfigure it in my mind and say, well, what time of day would work better? And it really just, that simple shift really revolutionize things, because it wasn't him pestering me, or and then feeling rejected, or feeling like he's, harming me in some way by having a desire at 10 o'clock at night. It was clear that that's not going to go over well. But, another time of day, things were like, okay, we just could steer clear of that.
Yeah, this is interesting. I didn't ever really think of that before, but when your partner and you are on different circadian rhythms, right? That can be an issue. I mean, for intimacy, for instance, I mean, I can tell you, even with my wife and I, we have completely different. She definitely prefers to sleep in, and she could stay up a little, later perhaps. And I am a very early riser. Like, I would get up at 3:45, 4 o'clock in the morning. I like the sunrise. I like to get up and walk and then meditate and then watch everyone else wake up. But that means I get tired earlier, right? So there's a zone somewhere in there where we're both vital. And unfortunately, it's probably around the middle of the workday. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's a conversation that I think might be interesting for you, for your wife.
Yeah, those are things that your book, you get into a lot of that type of territory. And I was like, these are conversations that we're not having that we probably should have. And once we find that time zone, we can work around that instead of working around being countersynced to each other. You know what I mean? And that's sometimes, I think a lot of couples perhaps go through that. I've talked to other people where you get the impression that their lives are, they're just on a string sort of swinging around each other, but there's no middle. They're swinging around their kids or they're swinging around their jobs. And a way that my visualization for that is like just an axis in the middle with two iron balls, and whatever's in the middle, whether it's a sick parent or a crisis or a job or whatever it is, they're both just sort of swinging around it on opposite ends. Yeah. And it's still a relationship, of sorts, but it's just that intimacy in the middle is difficult to get to because the gravity is pulling them away to some degree, but they're tethered. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Because there is an intimacy glue that can get undone when we disconnect from each other, just romantically, not just physical intimacy. And and then it's hard to find. And so the center just becomes these shared responsibilities or a shared abode. And or just, we happen to live together, and something, it can feel, like something profound is missing. And what's missing is I think that really intense validation and love and oxytocin and all those goodies of feeling, of loving and feeling loved. And but it can be hard to find our way back to it. But I think in some ways it's easy to find our way back, but I don't think we often have very concrete solutions because we're not talking about it enough. And I'm normalizing the fact that that this happens, and it's not a cliche, it's not a joke. It's a pathway, and we need a pathway. I teach an online course. I just created it, and it looks at that, and I call it a pleasure access point. For for individuals, but also couples. Where they just kind of ease back onto the path. But even each time that they're together romantically, it might require that as well, because we're just, our day is like that too, as you're describing, where it's revolving around all these responsibilities. And then it's like, oh, wait, we said we were going to make love today. Okay, let me find my way into that mood.
Oh, right. No, right. I totally get that. It's interesting the way you worded that. Let me get myself into that zone. It gets into things that I really think about all the time, which is identity, and who am I? And for the most part, I mean, if you really think about it, we're all a bunch of different people. I mean, we can say we're one person, but if you really focus on it, you do take on different roles throughout the day, throughout the year, throughout your life, and they are in different zones, and they're almost like, Just like when you put a jacket on, to me, it's like putting a jacket on when it's cold outside. It's the same sort of thing. It's like, well, I'm entering this zone. I need to wear the bulk. I mean, it's still me, but I need to attach myself with these other things because this is what I'm going to do. This is the identity. I need to sort of convalesce around myself for this task.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds very clinical, but I mean, sex could probably be like that.
I spoke with my dear friend Bridget Dengel Gaspard.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And Bridget's an old friend of mine, but her book changed my life.
Really?
I mean, seriously, it did. I know Bridget from acting school 25 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And our paths have crossed since that time a few times, and in the past 10 years especially. And when she told me she was doing voice dialogue, I thought I didn't really get it, what it was. I mean, I got it a little bit conceptually, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. But then I read her book recently, and I thought, oh my gosh, I really need to do this kind of work. And it set me on my own voice dialogue path. I can't speak highly enough of that work and of Bridget in particular.
Interesting. That's such
really
a beautiful
profound
intersection. I mean, I can see how that does inform what you're doing. I mean, what you just said even about entering that zone of sex time, you know, I mean, whatever it is. And I've always, again, even talking about this, and I'll say something that's really personal, but it's the way that I can observe the way my mind works. Just hearing you say that, I was like, oh yeah, I have this idea that sex must be elevated. It has to be sacred.
Yeah.
And when it's not that, then I'm an offender. I know that's crazy, but I don't like to use the word crazy, but that's the way it's wired in my head. And it goes back to what I told you in the beginning. So if I'm doing anything that isn't in that sacred space or making it that way, only that way, then I should probably not do it. If I can't make it that way. So what ends up happening is, honestly, that's very difficult to do. If you're going to have a normal, healthy sexual relationship with someone on a regular basis, that's difficult to elevate sex to sacred status.
Yeah, time.
So if you're going to avoid it altogether, and I'm about to draw a really weird line, but this is kind of gets into territory about the way it's the opposite of how I feel about things like the Catholic Mass, for instance. Like, it's elevated, it's sacred, all these things have to happen, it has to be on cue, and everyone has to have their rubber stamps and be doing everything right and not be divorced and all the rules that surround it. But I take the opposite approach with that. I go, yeah, it is a sacred thing, but it needs to be brought down to earth so common people who aren't perfect can approach that and get the same great, beautiful things out of it. I think it should just be opened up and poured out into commonplace. Right? And so it's weird that I would, you know, it's like I take that and I look at that and I go, well, let me look at sex. So with sex, I'm like making a mass out of it. But why won't I just bring it down to earth and let it just be normal and good? Does that make sense?
That does. And because I think that sex also draws upon the more animal part of us, and in a way that is very beautiful, and also it's sacred in its own kind of way in terms of our rootedness to the planet and to reproduction and to growth. And this very, very material aspect of being. And so I think it, like you could think of it as connecting us to all living things on the planet. And, so it's that. And it's also something that might be more elevated and spiritual in a way that's beyond the material plane. And so I think it's allowing ourselves to hold both of those and to have both of those inform the experience without feeling like we've got to privilege one or the other, or if one is more activated now, like the animal is more activated, let's say, than the priestly
Yeah, right.
experience, that's somehow wrong or bad, when in fact we need both of those, I think, ideally.
Yeah, gosh, I get it. I mean, it's exactly what you're saying. It's like a harmony, but I can see how it can get askew. I think it has something to do ultimately with taking a position. I mean, for me, I guess it goes back to pain. I mean, ultimately, when you've had some sort of pain or something in there that sets the perspective at a young age, it changes your view on things, and you don't realize it's done it. You don't even know it till later. There was something else I wanted to talk to you about, because I definitely got that out of your work and your book, was entanglements. We talk a lot about that on this show, like how one thing that is unrelated to gets entangled with another type of trauma. Or sometimes something, a physical ailment arises out of a trauma, but it is very real. And then it becomes its own kind of trauma all on its own. And I kind of I got that from your book too, when you were talking about your physical pain, at the beginning of your journey, and when you were trying to discover what it was. And I related to that because, I mean, even as a man, because I've never talked about this on the show before, but I, for 17 years, suffered with, what I thought it was this chronic urinary tract infections.
Wow.
And they just kept, for 17 years, it was like they kept getting worse and worse and worse. Like, I mean, like I'm talking to the point where I would be hospitalized and catheterized repetitively. And no one could figure out what it was. I mean, it was just years of this suffering. I mean, it was going to the bathroom was suffering constantly.
Wow.
Having an orgasm was suffering. And I mean, it was, and when I would be having a flare up, having an orgasm, I mean, this is really probably too much information for some people, but it would be like, but I mean, I read your book, so I know there's no TMI. But I thought about this when I was reading your book. I was like, oh, I remember this pain. Like when I was afraid to climax because of the pain. There was always pain. I mean, excruciating. And sometimes having an orgasm would almost start a cascade of another round of urinary tract infections where I would be completely blocked off.
Urethra is involved in both processes.
That's right.
And that sounds like that's culprit.
Yeah. So I did that for about 17 years. And in the midst of that, I got divorced and remarried. And then it's like having a new partner. You have to tell them, hey, look, I'm going to have pain. It's going to be weird. You have to explain all this stuff and you're like embarrassed about it. And it creates like all this attention around your groin. It's like so many conversations about what's going on down there. Do you know what I mean? Nothing sexy about that. But you're going, okay, I have to disclose this because it's going to come up. I can't hide it. But then I finally, on one emergency room visit, had a urologist who figured out what was wrong.
What was it?
A mutation. I had a mutation that was causing deep inside my urethra, like way up inside my body. It was actually started out as a calloused ring around the urethra that kick-started a urinary tract infection, and then that would cause a bladder infection and kidney infection. It was like it would all... it was back and forth. Then antibiotics. And then he said all the years of being catheterized and just this 15 years, 16 years of infections, now it has completely, it would tear open and then reheal and tear and reheal. And then on this last round, I was telling him, I said, I am completely closed off. I can't do anything. And he saw that when he went in with a scope and he cut it open. He showed me the picture. He said, this whole section needs to be cut out. And so they went in through my groin and cut out, a section of urethra and reattached it. And now I haven't had a problem since for years. I mean, it's been, but it was like an angel from heaven came down and healed me. I mean, I told my wife that. I said, it changed my life. He fixed me, but I guess that's a long story, but it reminded me of the pain you were talking about in your book, because what happened, even though I got healed, I still have that in my head that sex is going to hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm now 7 years healed, and I still think it when I have sex, that it's going to hurt.
Yeah, it's true. That's exactly what that's what I experienced as well. And also all these people I work with that have pelvic pain. It's and it's the biggest obstacle for all of us is first is this kind of despondency, feeling like it's never going to be better because it's just gone on and on and on.
Yeah.
And that once it does get better, hopefully it does, and it is about finding the right practitioner, which can take a while. But once it does, there's always, right, that we are now wired to expect the worst.
Yeah.
And we're hypervigilant around it, and that can also hamper us. So it's there's a lot of layers there. That's why I'm actually starting my own podcast, Oran. I think it's going to be February. I'm working out the timing as
exciting.
We speak, but it's going to be all about sexual healing. And I'm going to. I just want to talk about all these issues that we're not talking about, that go on for men, that go on for women, that go on for people of genders that don't identify as either or switch from one to the other. And
sure. And
we all have so much in common, but first of all, none of us are speaking about it openly because we all feel respectively ashamed, but there's not any cross conversation around this. So this is amazing. This is such a gift, right? You telling me about your pelvic pain, right? Reading about my own pelvic pain, and when do we have this opportunity?
Right.
Right? With people of different genders, people of the same gender, no, but this is like so rare.
Yeah, I thought that that's why I kept telling you, like, I couldn't wait to talk to you, because I really sometimes in any conversation that's for public consumption, there's almost a tendency to craft it a little bit or curate it a little bit. And I've tried to not do that on this show, but I've allowed each guest's life and what they're about and what they're doing to sort of, I look in myself basically and go, how is this affecting me when I'm reading this or experiencing what they're saying? And what kept coming up out of your work for me was very personal and very intimate. And I thought I would be doing such a disservice if I didn't tell you these things, because this is almost exactly what it seems like you're trying to help people with. And
right.
That hopefully people listening will hear that and learn what I'm still learning, that it's okay. You can talk about this openly, and you need to with your partner or with someone like you, because it can be healed, obviously. I mean, proof positive. I see that in you, Right.
And I think often the most important person, is that we admit this to ourselves. And then if we're partnered, that we are able to have that conversation. But then next in line is definitely our healthcare provider or providers, because as you experience and I experienced, and everyone I know who's gone through a process of trying to heal pelvic pain has experienced, it can take a long time to find the right person. And often the difficulty can be because we're not talking about it enough. If we were talking about it with friends, for instance, they might be able to say, I know this terrific urologist that treated me for something else, but, he's a great guy, and why don't you go see him?
Right.
Or that we'd tell our doctor and they'd say, oh, it's fine, or let's just try another round of antibiotics, and we might be able to say, because it's more open, we might be able to say, you know what, I want a referral. I want to see a specialist. And I think that because we're not talking about it, we're not really pressuring our doctors and other medical providers, and in some cases, relevant cases, mental health providers, we're not pressuring them to be better informed around these issues because the demand is not there, and the demand has to come from us, and the demand has to start with us feeling not ashamed that we've got these issues.
Yeah, shame is such a huge factor. I mean, being embarrassed. I remember it. I mean, I remember even just being embarrassed when my wife and I were dating in the early years, you know, that to even bring it up, these physical issues, you know, nobody wants to talk about that. I didn't want to. I mean, I remember.
Yeah.
What I meant earlier, I wanted to ask you about that is trauma entanglements is kind of where I was going with that, and I derailed myself, and it made me wonder if you've experienced that where you see two different types of trauma. And that's partly why I shared that story where you have like a childhood sexual trauma, but then you also have like a physical trauma. Then those two things aren't related necessarily, but they end up in this strange symbiosis together where you don't know, where one's sort of informing the other, and you can't, they keep almost feeding each other.
Oh, yeah. And I would, first of all, I think a lot of people have some kind of medical trauma and or relationship trauma that may not be as explicit. It could be, for instance, something that we might not think of as being traumatic, but let's say that we were in a relationship where we were rejected repeatedly. That's a kind of trauma.
Oh, sure.
And it triggers certainly childhood issues around abandonment or rejection. So I think that that could be, you know, something that's going on, right, that's now layered on top. Then there is medical trauma, right, if we have had some kinds of could just be one procedure or, you know, or even just one exam, which made us really pull back and have some kind of adverse physical reaction. That can be wired in, like touching that hot stove.
Oh, yeah.
It's exactly the same neurology.
Yeah.
And if things have gone on for a while, as they did with you and with me, then that becomes a kind of setting, I guess, within us.
Yeah. That's
And
a
then
good way to put it. It's a setting. Yes. I like that. Think of it that way.
And then what about our parents and their attitudes towards sex?
Right.
Their own traumas, perhaps, in this department, and how those, of course, are going to be layered on top of our just our whole worldview with regard to love and intimacy and touch and connection and sexuality. So there's a lot of things that are present for us, I think, for all of us, and we're only just perhaps starting to talk about these things. Me Too is a good start, just to say, you know, there's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of abuse, and it affects people of all genders. So that's the start here. But I think we've got to now, I believe, go into these different areas and talk about all the things that are going on for us, and that it's not just, let's say, young, beautiful women who are harassed in the workplace, right? It's more than that. It is that, but it is more than that too.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. I mean, I drew parallels to that when I was reading your book and then going through your website, and you were talking about your family, you know, and the Nazis and the Holocaust. And I was like, wow, so there's some generational sort of pain there. That's a huge thing that could get entangled, you know, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I started, you know, of course we didn't have that in our family, our history, but there were other things. And I go, yeah, those things get, you know, like infidelity and things like that inform you as a child. And I think depending on which gender you are, even, it can inform you differently. You know, like being a young boy and seeing infidelity, you know, and then you get that entangled with a a relative being sexually abused, and then the injustice, and then a physical ailment. You got three orbs of, it's just interesting to look at it that way, sort of clinically, and go, these three things aren't connected really, but because they exist in one human being, they've nested together, you know?
That's right. And I love the way you're saying that they've nested together. And what I recommend when I'm coaching people is that they dig and they dig and they pull it all apart so that each strand can be looked at individually.
Yeah.
And because each of them may need something slightly different, but because they're interrelated, often the remedy can also be nested together.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I think first we've got to see what are the different component parts, what are the different things that are going on, because often they do have something similar. And so that's why I'm saying the remedy can also be similar, and it can be something even simple. It could just be a way of like that communication I was talking about with a spouse, just maybe a 30-minute or a 15-minute conversation once a week with our spouse to air out different things that are going on with us in this department or generally, just because then that's going to work on the shame, right? You see, but even if it's got different culprits, it's going to work on perhaps the shame. It's going to address maybe feelings of disempowerment or fear of hurting another person, or not wanting to be, not wanting to be a perpetrator. There's a lot of different things we can address with just, I think, this kind of simple communication. And if somebody's not partnered, or even in addition to that, definitely just connecting to our own erotic self, just to in a healthy way, just to validate it and to give it some space and to listen to ourselves to see, well, what would I like out of this part of my life?
Yeah. It's beautiful. And that's really what your book's all about, right? I mean, and so we haven't really talked about that a whole lot. I'd love to let the listeners know, like, what they can expect when they read your book. I mean, because it has some exercises and, things that they can do in the book.
Yeah. Well, at the end of each chapter, I have some writing prompts and also an exercise that everybody can try. And it's related particularly to what's going on in that chapter. So it's not necessarily a linear process that I lay out in the book, though in my courses I do, since it's since I can do something that's more of a system.
Right.
But in the book, it's contextualized by what's going on at that point in the story.
Right.
And I meant it to not be linear, because that's also can be true for what's going on for people. And I wanted people to read my story and to see what maybe resonated for them in terms of questions they might ask themselves, because people might they might enter their own healing journey at any point, or continue that healing journey at any point. And I wanted to just inspire investigation in a way that was that wasn't prescribed, but that was just inspired by what was going on in the book.
Yeah, I liked that about it. I really enjoyed the book. I mean, it was a breath of fresh air in the sense that I loved your language, so to speak. I thought, wow, she's got such a colorful way of describing some of these things that you were describing in the book, situations. And I was almost like there several times. I felt like, man, I can feel this, like this.
Oh, thank you so much.
Is this your first book?
Yeah, it is. And I worked really hard to be able to do that.
And it's really good. I was like, yeah, I get this. Like, there was definitely, I didn't realize until after I read your book that you were involved with theater, to the extent that you were, and then the play that you had put together, which we can talk about that actually if you want. But I could now, once I realized that, I was like, oh, you can sense it. Like there was definitely like films playing in my mind, the scenes were rich and textured.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, writing for the theater for a long time is really different because we don't describe things. Everything takes place right in front of the audience, and
Yeah.
action takes place mostly through dialogue and through stage directions, but you're seeing that, you're not reading it. So developing the muscle or muscles for being able to do description was it was a whole journey for me, a whole new learning curve.
I have to actually say, like, I know this, and I don't know if maybe this is irrelevant. Maybe it's not even the same space. I don't know if that's where you're at, but your walls are rose pink, and you describe. They look like behind you. Yeah, and you mentioned that in the book. Lavender. Okay, it looks kind of pink, and I thought that's so funny because I remember that part in the book where you were describing the walls where you're in your living space, so they were rose pink, and it allowed you to sort of forget that there was this man in in the home, and which was an indicator that sex was a part of life, and it was this pain associated with it. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, this is so interesting because I get this. And then just when you pulled up your video and I saw the color, it kind of just brought that to my mind.
Yeah. This is kind of it's not a compromise because we live in a different apartment now across the hall. That's the last chapter of the book, and we couldn't do pink walls, of course. Although one room is pink, but it's a very small room. But this is our shared office. And we both agree that a lavender would be a good neutral color for us because we like color. So.
That's great. I love that. Could you talk a little bit about your the play that you wrote? I think that was really neat. I was like, man, this is she's taken this and really utilizing all of your talents, which I think is one of my favorite things about talking to people is how they take their pain, perhaps, and then they take their talents, put them together, and make these beautiful things.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just preface it by saying I'm now turning it into a TV show.
Really?
So I'm going through a similar process and taking the same source material and bending it and learning new writing skills. So I was creating. I have created 7 one-person plays. This was my very strange specialty. I started writing one-person plays, or I started writing monologues back in 1989.
Okay.
1989, I wrote my first monologue. I was an actor in New York, and I just spontaneously wrote a monologue one day for my roommate. It was from a guy's point of view, and then they just kind of flowed from there. One monologue turned into a one-person show that I did that was comprised of 3 monologues, a full evening of theater, and then I just kept going with that, and I did that for a long time. For 20 years, I was creating these one-person pieces, and that's what I did with this material. I wanted to create a one-person play, but it does have a very special function in my story, in that I got the play commission, and I just decided spontaneously that I was going to write about my sex problems, but my sex problems were very much not healed at that point at all.
Interesting, yeah.
And so I wasn't going to write about a journey I'd been on. I was going to use the opportunity to go on the journal. It was more like investigative journalism, where I was going to discover how to heal by writing about it in real time. And I had a deadline. I knew they were going to give me this reading. I was going to put it on the stage, and that's what I needed. I needed to feel like, okay, I've got to get this figured out by this day because I'm going to do this big thing. And it was just a huge risk, because I was going to talk about this extremely personal part of not just my life, but my marriage, my husband's life, which caused a big conflict between us. But it worked. It worked because I needed to be public about this initially in order to free me up to investigate different things and to take this seriously, I want to say, to take my pleasure seriously. Otherwise, I would not have committed to it. I wouldn't have committed to my own pleasure or being generous with myself. I would have said, no, it's enough if I don't have good feelings when I'm intimate. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. See, I've thought about that quite a bit, and I will say this is one of the this is personal, but I mean, I get it. It's like being generous with yourself. Because I was in pain so much, I had to think about the intimacy had to be about the other person so much, because there was a reserve of my attention that was on my own pain. Do you know what I mean? I mean, so
definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So there was this sort of thing that emerged where I became more servicing, if that's the word I'll use, to the other, to my partner. And it was like, well, I want to make sure that I'm servicing them properly because I'm probably not gonna be able to enjoy this.
Oh, wow.
Does that make sense? And so I became almost like more...
Really, so analogous.
Yeah, that was one of... And now that the pain is not there, I guess that still remained. It was like I learned how to be generous to another person. The problem is I haven't learned how to be generous to myself yet.
Yeah.
I still haven't really learned that, but it's interesting the way you're saying that. Like that seems to keep coming up on this show through different vehicles. This idea that compassion, you have to have, at some point, you have to be compassionate to yourself. You can't just keep pouring out from an empty cup, so to speak. It came up in another conversation this week and the week before, and I'm like, I need to learn this too. I need to learn this. I hope that somebody listening learns that too. And in this context as well.
Definitely. And I so love that image of the cup, because I think that it's, I've heard it described that when you fill your own cup, it just naturally spills over. You've got something, right? You've got excess that can just be given generously. But when the cup is not full, then there is a lack. And even if we are wanting to be generous to other people, it's a part of us is perhaps resentful because we don't have enough. We're not filled up. And so I really do identify with that, because I experience it like that when I do fill myself up in this way, that it's, I have so much more to give. Yeah.
And that's a state I would rather live in than from a state of lack, because I think when you give from lack, and I know I've experienced this many times in my life, and it's not that you're looking for accolades or pat on the back or recognition, but when you're giving from lack, I think it has the potential to build resentment, possibly, because you're feeling depleted, and you maybe don't even realize it, but there's like a buzz in the background, nagging. And if you fill your own cup, you can give, and it doesn't feel that way. And I'm learning that slowly. At 46, I'm still learning. We just keep learning.
It goes on and on. The learning goes on and on and on, thankfully.
Yes, thankfully. That's right. That we were just having this conversation last night. And actually, I'd actually be curious, now that we've brought this up, what you think about cancel culture, because you brought up the Me Too movement, and we were talking about this last night in my family. I said, I've seen like movie directors that I really like, let's say, that are making movies that I'm going, hey, I can't wait to see the next one. And then like a sexually insensitive, or maybe just an insensitive tweet that they made a decade ago will come out, and then all of a sudden they're just canceled. they are fired from the movies they're doing. Fans run the other direction. And then I've seen a few times where the person, when you watch their interviews or something, they're like, man, I've changed in 10 years. I'm not that same person, but I'm being sort of canceled based on a behavior that I no longer, or a worldview that I no longer adopt. Words that I said that I no longer adhere to, that I'm sorry for. But it makes me wonder about that. I mean, in the context of what we're talking about, how important it is to allow people to change, like make room for them to change too. Like, I want to change. I want room for me to change, but it seems like we don't want to leave room for other people to change. We lock them into whatever was the most painful behavior that we experienced. Like a divorce, for instance. I was just talking about this with my son. I said, people get divorced for various reasons, right? And I said, if I have a worldview, a view of my ex-wife that is 15, 16, 17 years old. And if you asked her about me, she would have her worldview of me would be 15 or 16 or 17 years old, and they're probably neither one very good. But if we met today and it was the first encounter, we might think, oh, that's generally a nice person that I don't feel any of those things about. We've changed. You know what I mean? People change.
People change. Yeah, definitely. I think that, so I have a couple of thoughts about it.
Okay.
One is that I think the way that we're framing it currently in like either we're going to, let's say the person who comes to campus, right, whose views are not popular.
Right.
Either we're going to let that person speak on campus, or we're going to cancel the engagement because this person pisses off too many people.
Right.
So it's, I think that, and then people are up in arms, no matter what the ultimate, administrative decision is. Half of the,
right.
Half the people are going to be up in arms around it. So I think that part of the problem for me is that we're just not looking at this with enough. We're not really addressing the different nuances and the complexities. We're looking at it in a very simplistic way, and in so doing, we're not maybe getting at the heart of the issue. So the people who don't want so and so to come to campus, there is a pain there,
right?
A legitimate pain, and often when we're saying, well, they have every right, First Amendment rights, and we can't be, and unpopular views are important for discourse and intellectual development. We're not, often that point of view is not addressing the pain. And so we're not bringing that into the conversation and asking people, well, what aside from not having so-and-so speak, what do you need? Because often the desire to not have this person speak is just, it's another manifestation of somebody saying, listen, I don't feel like my pain is acknowledged.
Yeah.
I think that that's at the source of this, is
Gotcha.
Somebody feels that their pain or victimization, harm is not being acknowledged, and so it needs to come out this way because there aren't enough channels to express that. So I think that needs to be brought into the conversation. And on the other side, I think that often we're not bringing into the conversation is just general skill building around resilience.
Yeah.
And around how we can be together with differing voices and have conversations together and feel, and everyone feel not just heard and acknowledged, but also resilient, that we're not going to crumble if somebody disagrees with us or somebody is hostile to our point of view. So I just think we're not doing enough. We're not looking at this with enough of a let's say an in-depth lens or we need more of a microscope to just see the different layers, because I think that it may not be such an issue if we could just address what was really going on.
Yeah, those are both very enlightened answers. I'm so glad you gave them, because I agree with that. And I think skill building, it makes me think about just the skill of having conversations and listening. I mean, that's something that I see being lost in a lot of the public arena, is the ability to actually listen and just for a moment listen to someone's point of view, and not see it as an attack against your point of view. It can be their point of view. You don't have to adopt it, but it seems like now we live sort of in a time where that is seen as an attack. If you don't adopt the point of view or affirm that it is accurate, or that you believe it as well, then it's seen as an attack. And I think we have to move past that space big time.
Definitely. And we also have to move past attacking, because I think that it's gotten to a stage where we do attack each other rather than merely disagree. And I think it's not necessarily just a perception, but often it is an approach. It is a kind of aggressiveness around our position and a lack of humility that we don't have it all figured out. And this is our worldview, and maybe these are our strong beliefs, but that doesn't mean it's the quote unquote truth. It just means that this is, or it's our truth, right?
Right.
But it's not everybody's truth. It's like saying, if somebody believes in a Christian God versus a Jewish God, right? It's not, can't say, I don't believe that. It's valid to say, only my God exists and your God doesn't exist, because, we might find commonality, right?
Right, commonality. I agree. It's. I love it when I'm reading books. Like I love to read Thomas Merton, but I also love to read books by Tibetan teachers. And what I love about that is when they begin to talk about monastic life or the structures of monasticism. I'm like, this is the interesting part. They come from completely different traditions. I mean, all the boiled down goodness that comes out of them is similar or the same, but they don't come from the same place necessarily. I mean, they're not informed by the same history or geography or any of that, or lineages. But when they start talking about their monastic life and they start using words like abbot and monastery and cell, and I'm like, this is so strange. They come from completely different worlds, but they have this incredibly common language and structure that they all live by. And I love that. I think that's just so beautiful. So when you see some that are really enlightened get together to dialogue, they just love it so much because they're both enriched by their differences. And I think that's the most beautiful thing, that two things that couldn't be more different can actually just really compound and enrich each other. It kind of makes me go back to what you were talking about earlier about having three different traumas, but the solution is, and I got this picture in my head when you were talking about it, I kept thinking of these compound pharmacists, that actually make a customized compound for you. And I was like, that's what it reminds me of. You eat everything. Everybody almost needs their own compound solution to some degree.
I love that. The compound solution, but it's one cream.
Yeah, one cream.
You don't need
that's
three
right.
creams.
That's right.
I'm going to use that. Oh, I love that so much. But what I also love so much, and this seems like it's, at the heart of your work, right? Ecumenical, right? This ecumenical spiritual path is, well, first of all, I just love that and really respect what you're doing so much in speaking to people from all these different traditions. But then I love what you're saying, how we're enriched by the differences. It's not just that we find something that we can all agree upon, let's say, but that we are enriched. How do you pray? Oh, that's really interesting.
Right.
Wow, you do that. You do that on your knees, or you do that with movement. Maybe I'll try that.
Right. I know. I have this dream, like in this wish in my mind. I daydream about it all the time in our community here where I lived, of having a multicultural center where people from different traditions come and help teach each other, and and it's exactly what you just described, where they're enriching each other. Like there's actually a eagerness to learn, not to be, converted, to still remain true in your own tradition, but to be able to go, oh, I can pick from this tree, over here. A pomegranate is not an apple, and an apple's not a pomegranate, but I can hand you that, and you can hand me this, and then we can both enjoy those flavors. You know what I mean? I think it seems so simple, but it ends up being so complex in a world full of strong ideas and positions.
Yeah, and maybe that's our opinions and our ideas are too strong in a way that they lack lack humility to just to see that to be that openness to see how others do it. But I got a chill when you were talking about that center. I really think you need to do that, and I could see there's so much disagreement in the world. I could see, people coming together around even the most contentious issues.
Right.
And, and being, instead of fighting, imagine being inspired by each other saying, without getting into any details around the election, because, it was so contentious. And, but, just in broad strokes, wouldn't it be great, people from both sides, that's so interesting that's at the heart of your position. I want to, not just I want to understand you, but I want that to enrich my life, right? Oh, right. Fairness. Oh, that's how you see fairness. That's inspiring to me.
It's interesting to hear. I know I didn't expect us to end up going down this path, but that happened to me recently, and it was related to the election, where I was. And I'll just openly talk about it instead of just beating around the bush. I'll just say it the way it is. It may be easier to talk about that way. One of the spiritual directors for the White House was Paula White, I believe was her name, and she's an evangelical minister. She has a big church, and I think there was a popular video of her going around, saying angels are coming from Africa, and strike, 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 and it sort of looks like, and I'm just going to be honest, like when I look at it, I go, this person's really unhinged. Like, that's what I thought when I was watching it. I was like, she's really unhinged, And it's easy to do that. And I won't say that I subscribe to her worldview at all, or her religious sensibilities, or spiritual for that matter. But I happened to stumble across this guy who's sort of made it his work to explain what we're seeing when we see things like that, because he was in that world, and he's sort of been freed from it, is the way he says, I've been freed from that, but I want to help you understand why people think like this. And it was strange, because I almost had no compassion for Paula White. I really didn't. I had none. I would watch that and would just sort of, I hate to admit this publicly, but like, I just would go, that's just a ball of crazy I don't want anything to do with. I just would shove it in that corner of my mind. But once I listened to him talk about that world, he was explaining what she was saying and why people would follow someone like that, and what they were getting out of that. And I was like, wow, all it took was somebody to stop me from shoving her aside and explain it to me. And once I listened to what he had to say, I was like, okay, I still disagree with her, but now I'm informed.
Yeah.
And I'm not just being callous or crass. I look at her with an intelligent understanding of why she's saying what she's saying. And from her worldview and the people surrounding her, there's meaning in that. And I had never seen it before. I was sitting there kind of taking it again, shamefully, just saying, oh, that's bad, crazy, shove in box over here or put aside. And and I guess my point in saying all that is I wish we could all do that when we see something that's alien. We don't have to subscribe to it, but we could at least make an effort to understand it.
Certainly, and what you're pulling out of that as well is that if people are really responding to that, to her and her message, then I think it behooves us to, especially if people are doing that en masse, to see, well, what is it? What is it here? I don't agree, or this is not my worldview, but what is it that is compelling for this group of people? Because I think there's something there. If so many people are responding, there's something there. There is a chord, right, that she's striking, and I think that, yeah, it behooves us to have understanding and compassion around that, so that we're not just demonizing all these followers, then saying, well, she's obviously crazy, so these people are deluded, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, right, exactly. It shuts us off to learning, for one, and then it really does have, I feel like, in analyzing myself after really looking at that, I went, I'm just as bad on my side of the fence by doing that. If I'm expecting other people to be open-minded and look back at me and what I practice, or when anybody or what I want them to do with other people offer that same compassion, how can I then do this to this person? Doesn't mean, again, that I have to adopt it, but I don't know. It gets back into, I guess, that part we were talking about being allowing people to change and giving them the same room and consideration that we want,
Yeah, definitely.
I'm happy, I know it. I'm helpless.
Hey there, Good News listener. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I've enjoyed producing it. Now, it's time for the Fishing for Goodies segment, where I turn my interviewer role over to the Good News Fishbowl. Longtime listeners know that the Fishbowl contains over 400 unique questions, many seeded by you, the listeners. Did you know that you could submit unique questions to the Fishbowl? That's right. Just call the Good News hotline at 802-459-1668 to have your question added. You can also visit findthegood.news and send me an email. Now, let's take that dive into the fishbowl. So look, did you listen to Bridget's episode of Find the Good News?
I didn't. I didn't get to listen to it. I did listen to the other ones that you sent me, though.
Oh, and, good.
But I didn't get to listen to Bridget's yet.
So then you know about this fishbowl, then.
I do.
Okay, awesome. Well, then I won't get into the big spill about it. It's got over 400 questions in here. I do not know what's going to come out. So I'm going to draw 3 questions. Let's just see what happens.
So cool.
Okay, I like this question. This is something I think about all the time. If you could go back, what would you like to change about your education?
Well, that's an easy one for me, because my whole journey was about sex education. So, and feeling like I didn't have any knowledge really when I started my journey, even though I was already in my 40s, well into my 40s. So, yeah, so I would change my sex education from a very, very early age, so that I knew what pleasure was for the female body, what pleasure was for my own body. I would know about agency, that I had power, that I had the ability to reimagine what sex is, so that it worked for me. So many things I think are missing from our sex education, certainly my sex education. So I think that's going to be my number one answer. That's
a good answer. I think we need to have that. I think children need that. I mean, not, granted within reason, but I mean, to some degree, we need to have more open conversations about it. And I think it'll do away with a lot of the shame that we have, which causes us to not have conversations about it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. That's a great answer. It's actually a good question for you, too. The fishbowl provides. Okay. Well, this is such a similar question, but what an odd thing. Okay. What was your favorite subject in school?
Oh. Okay. So my favorite subject in school, let's see. Well, up until high school, my favorite subject was everything.
Really?
Yes. I loved school.
Really?
And even now, yeah. And even just thinking about it, I can smell those hallways, especially in the morning when you first get into school, and it's a little bit of the disinfectant that they use to.
Yeah,
it's a little bit,
I know what you're
right?
talking about, like the mop, that whatever that was that they mopped the bathrooms and the halls with. Yeah.
But it's mixed in with talking about compounding. It's mixed in with the lunchroom and what's going to happen for lunch. So it could be like a smell of like hot dogs, like a little scent of like some kind of hot dogs, and then that's mixed in with the smell of I want to say the furniture seemed to have its own smell, and all the chalk.
Oh wow, yeah.
It was, I love that. I just loved that smell. And I loved school. I did. I was one of those really annoying kids who sat up front and asked a lot of questions. And it wasn't until I got to high school that my academic strengths and weaknesses became a bit more apparent to me.
Okay. Yeah.
And, I wasn't very good in math class, and I really loved English class. And so I didn't like PE.
Oh, yeah. We were similar in that regard. I didn't like math very much. I loved English, PE not so much. It was just the same thing. I can relate to that. Yeah, I think it was the idea of school. It's so different now too. I mean, for my children.
Oh yeah, how old are your kids?
I've got one that's 22, so she's out of the home. I've got one that's 17. He's a senior, and another that is 10. And so school.
You broke up.
I've got one that's 17, who's a senior in high school, and then my youngest is 10. So I have one that's older, is 22, but she's gone out of the home. But yeah, school's changed. It's so complicated with COVID, and we have had 2 hurricanes here this summer, and so we got direct hits twice, and so our kids have been out of school and trying to do online school, and now they're back to face, but COVID is spiking again, and it's complicated. Their lives are so complicated right now. I feel sorry for the kids in the world. They're just this isn't what we grew up with, and trying to help them navigate it is a lot more counseling, honestly. I mean, it's just trying to keep them motivated and positive, and teaching them that things pass, and
but it's not something we've ever experienced in our time, so it's not like we even have great answers. We don't know when they can go back to school exactly, and that's hard for kids and parents.
It's just a different time. I mean, it's complicated. Hopefully I hope that we will draw. I believe we will. I mean, I know many people will learn good things and be able to use that to teach people through it. But collectively, I don't know. At large, what's happening is a little different. But I know on an individual scale, I do see people making good out of it.
Yeah.
That was a good question. I always love how these questions lead to other things. You just never know where they're going. I also love that you tie memory to the smells too. I was thinking of something when I was listening to you. I was like, that's interesting because I have a smell that's actually, and this doesn't mean to sound gross, but I mean it's a good smell. I have a smell that makes me think of sex.
Really?
Yeah, years ago. I found there was this lotion that my wife loved and I loved. It was masculine but kind of sweet, and it was like almost like a ritual. Like that was sort of like get a nice hot shower and then put that lotion on, and it was like the bed smelled like that. And so for years I always associated that as that smell with our time together. Well, they discontinued it.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so it was funny. About 2 or 3 months ago, I was doing some cleaning in my lavatory area, and I had found a bottle of it that I had not opened, and I was like, I kind of rubbed it on my arms one morning. I was like, Michelle, smell this, and she was like, oh my gosh, that smell. And it's funny how a smell can like just bring you back. It's like, oh, that's definitely a sex smell.
That is really, really fantastic. Yeah, but that's that pleasure, the pleasure access point I was talking about before. When you're, and it sounds like that worked its way organically into your own practice and into your own loving. Is that right? That we do need that transition. I would venture to say most of the time for those of us, who live busy lives. And it's so great when you can find something that does trigger your senses in a way that helps you make that transition. And so it's like you don't have to overthink it. It's just like, okay, I know, shower, lotion, that's going to help.
That's it, right. That's funny. You said switch earlier, like we were talking about a negative, like a pain, that there's a switch in there. But I believe that even with spiritual things. That's why I really advocate people to have objects and items that are special to them, to carry them on your body or to have them laying around. I mean, my life is cluttered with what I call secondhand sacred objects that are important to me, and when I see them, they trigger. And I think that if we can consciously plant those things, and they help override negative things. If we have so many unseen, like insidious negative switches,
yes,
let's plant some good ones. That's a good way to do it. And
I even have a name for it. I call them healthy triggers.
Healthy triggers,
it is triggering, and I think we can work the same. That we can work that mechanism, just like you're saying. Work it in a positive way.
Yeah.
Work it in a way to counterbalance the negative triggers.
Yeah, that's a healthy. I'm glad we talked about that, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is another good question. This is your last question.
Okay.
So describe what life may be like for you in 3 years if you allow your bad habits to stop you.
Wait, say it again?
Okay, so this is a complex question, but it's pretty good. Describe what your life will be like. It says in 3 years, but just generally is the way I would say it. Describe what your life would be like if you don't allow your bad habits to stop you. So that almost like as the saying, acknowledge what your bad habits may be that are getting in your way.
Yeah. Oh, I acknowledge them every day because they want to get in my way every day.
Now, me too.
Definitely. Lots of bad habits, lots of negative programming, you know, just kind of waiting there for me to let my guard down, and then the default, kind of go into that default mode.
Yeah.
So, but I love this question. Okay. So if I don't, I thought it was going to ask me to say, what would it look like
if I just let them stop me? I might have even read it wrong. Yeah, that was probably what I said the first time.
That's really depressing. Okay. So the opposite.
Yeah.
So if I don't let it, I just love this question so much. So, because it's acknowledging that this is going on for all of us, right? Or I'm assuming that it's going on for many of us, that we've got this negative stuff, or just, old patterns that want to sabotage our efforts. So if I don't let that stop me, all right, I've got 3 years is perfect because I've got this whole plan now, since it's the end of the year. I'm like gearing up for 2021. I've got the lists. I've got the plans, the strategies. Okay, so here's how it works. So these are my 3 biggest goals. So my biggest goal is I mentioned when we were talking about the play that I'm working on this teleplay for a streaming series like HBO, a streaming network. Yeah. So, and I am in the process of collaborating with a couple of friends of mine who work in television to put together this pilot and pitch this to a producer that I had the opportunity to meet and was invited through a certain kind of workshop, invited to pitch her. So if the demons don't get in the way, then I'll be pitching her, and if she declines, then I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna get this made into a television show.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's the book, in TV form.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and so that's my big goal. And then in addition to that, I want to, I call it for shorthand, I want to become a sexual healing influencer.
Oh,
That's,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, and just really start not just a conversation, but a kind of a movement around open conversation around all of these topics that could fall under that umbrella and create these cross conversations of people like we were just having.
Yeah.
Different people having vastly different sources for their pelvic pain, but being able to offer each other commiseration and ideas and encouragement and validation and compassion. So that's my vision, is to be able to create that and build a following around this. Basically, just to normalize discussion to the extent that it allows people to help others and to seek the help that they need.
That's wonderful. I mean, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking this is exactly what we can all do, right? I mean, so much of our life is directed or influenced by traumatic things in the past, whether it's sex or otherwise. And a lot of times it's negative. It's causing negative things to happen in our lives.
Yeah.
But what if, I mean, that's beautiful to take those very things and go, okay, I'm going to allow these to influence good. They're everything's energy. And if that energy is there, it's still vital, even if it's still usable, I guess. Right? I mean, it's like dual fuel, I guess, would be the way. I mean, it may not necessarily be it may be negative on the surface. It may come from trauma, but it's still fuel. And I can still make something run with it. And that what I'm going to put it in is what is going to matter the most. Wow. I don't know if that makes any sense, what I just said, but it's like,
I love that. That's such a great way of just encapsulating that. So, so beautifully and so succinctly. Wow.
Well, I have one more question to ask you. It's the last question of the show. It doesn't come from the fishbowl. I've asked almost every guest, and it's, did anything good happen today?
Thank you so much. That's such a great question. Yeah, lots of great things happened today. I woke up super energized because yesterday I found some people to help me in my business as I'm putting together strategies, and I found a great person to help me do some of the technical stuff for this podcast I'm going to launch.
Excellent.
So I just found some great. I haven't worked with them yet, but my heart and soul and gut says these are going to be great people to help me right now and exactly what I need. And so I woke up just incredibly motivated and clear, and I had the best morning. I just bought this new tea, and I was just drinking a whole pot of this very, very caffeinated but tasty tea, and so I was like very wired and and kind of high from yesterday, and I didn't sleep that much because I couldn't fall asleep with all these ideas.
Yeah, right.
I had one of those mornings where I was just like all the ideas were flowing, and I was super, super enthusiastic. And anyway, so yes, so my whole day's been awesome.
That's great. I love hearing things like that. I mean, that is why I asked that question, because it just gives us an opportunity for a minute to count. I guess just the old adage of counting your blessings,
Yeah.
It's so easy, as we started our conversation, to focus on this sort of array of negativity that could flood into our lives. And, I like to think of it as like catching fireflies for a minute, and going, hey, wait a second. There are good things. I mean, simple good things to be grateful for that we just skim by so often. I'm so guilty of it, getting caught in the clock and just riding it around the wheel all day long and missing all the wonder. That's lovely.
But then you've got this, which is pulling it out and asking people to pull that out and sharing it with all of these listeners. which is inspiring. Now it's going to inspire me, Oran, to think about, well, what was the good today, right? Or what is the good in this kind of crummy, what feels like a crummy situation? So, right. So that also that's got its own. It becomes its own catalyst.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Is great. I could keep going on and on and on. I imagine we could probably keep talking and find all kinds of wonderful things to talk about. I'm actually excited to see what you do with your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. If you've got any tips at all, I mean, I've been listening to yours, as I said, and I just, I love your format and your guests, and just very organic, flowing conversation. You know, you really, I'm taking a lot from that. The way you just really go with the conversation and don't try and control it that much, but let it reveal its magic.
Yeah, you know what? It's like, I know this is probably not the best way to describe it, but I've always had this feeling. It's almost like going on a first date. It's what every one of these has. I've tried to take that approach. It's like, every first date I've ever been on, I've probably been nervous and held back and didn't ask the questions I should have asked, didn't pay enough attention to the person in front of me, didn't reveal who I really was when I should have. And I thought, what would it be like if I was on a bunch of first dates? And that's what with everybody, I've tried to treat it that way. It's like, look, I'm just trying to get to know you through myself, and this is who I am, and please give me back who you are. And I've enjoyed it so much. I mean, if I can ever help in any way, let me know. I'd be more than glad to put out eyes and ears on anything you're doing. I'm really excited for you. On that note, how do you like for people to get engaged with you? I mean, I know you have lots of footprints online.
Yeah, so social media is great. I love when people message me on social media or just follow me, and I tend to follow people back. So just so I can be in conversation and in communion with people. And so Twitter's a really good place to find me. I'm at Laura Zam.
Okay.
Or Instagram, which is at Laura Zam _author.
Okay.
Or you just go to laurazam.com, my website, and all my social media icons are there. So, and that's a good central place as well, especially as I, continue to upload new courses and my podcast and all that sort of thing.
That's going to be the hub, right?
That's definitely the hub. Yeah, the ever-evolving hub.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd love to actually, Oran, I'd love to have you on my podcast.
Ooh, I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I really would love that. And if you are willing, and you can think about it, you don't have to answer now, but I would love to hear you talk about your experience with this chronic pain.
Oh, I would love to talk about it. Yeah.
That would be such a service to let people know that's you can't be the only person who's right.
Surely,
who's
that's what I thought too. It's interesting. I mean, not to totally derail that, but I thought that you talked about erectile dysfunction in your book, and that was kind of what triggered it for me too. I thought, what I went through wasn't erectile dysfunction, but it was something else, and I'll bet you there's people out there not talking about that. Men, and men. I don't even know what kinds of problems men have in that regard. Sexual trauma. I mean, it seems to me, in my experience, in the varieties of people I've met, most of the trauma has been, inflicted on females that I know. Less men that I know. And what it's made me wonder is that perhaps that men aren't talking about it as much.
Yeah, that's what I believe. I believe that men have been abused at maybe even, I don't know if it's identical rates, but I think it's way higher than we understand it to be, especially, childhood and early adolescence. But also when I talk to men, when I do talks and all kinds of things related to the book, what's been apparent to me, or what I've really just come to learn in the last year, is the degree to which, even if men don't have erectile dysfunction, and many do, of course, of all ages, but even if they don't, often it's in the back of their minds. It is a performance anxiety. And it's there's that fear of it, and a fear of inadequacy, and it's just another layer of healing that I think we're not talking about enough, and we're not honoring. Yeah. We're not honoring the stuff that goes on for guys, the complexities that are going on for men, physically and mentally, and combination.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I would love to be on your podcast. I think that would be a fascinating conversation, and maybe it would help somebody. That's what it's all about.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got I'll let you know when I'm scheduling guests. I will. I'm so thrilled about that.
I'm more thankful every moment that I found.
Thanks for listening to my Beacon Series conversation with Laura Zam. If you'd like to experience her book, The Pleasure Plan, visit findthegood.news/bookshop. If you found something of use in this conversation, consider visiting findthegood.news/donate, where you can help me continue this good news mission from the Louisiana Gulf Coast. I thank you for pressing play and for syncing up with this good news beacon.